I heard my daughter-in-law whisper, "That old hag doesn't even remember anything anymore. Just a few more days and all the money is ours." But she didn't know I was a lawyer. On Monday, her face dropped when she opened the handwritten gift I gave her. But let me start from the beginning, because what Jessica said that Thursday afternoon wasn't just cruel. It was the moment I realized I'd been playing a dangerous game for far too long. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the burgundy leather one Richard bought me for our 30th anniversary, pretending to doze while afternoon sunlight streamed through the living room windows. For the past 8 months, I'd been letting my family believe I was slipping into dementia. It started as a small experiment, really. After Richard's funeral, when David and Jessica moved in to take care of me, I noticed how differently they spoke to me when they thought I wasn't fully present. The first time I caught them whispering about my condition, I was coming back from the kitchen with my afternoon tea. They were huddled by the mantelpiece, Jessica's perfectly manicured finger pointing at the family photos. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. "She's getting worse," Jessica had said, her voice dripping with false concern. Yesterday, she asked me 3 times if I'd seen her reading glasses. They were on her head. I had done that on purpose, of course. As a former estate attorney who'd spent 43 years dealing with family disputes, I knew exactly how greed revealed itself. What I hadn't expected was how quickly my own son would join in. "Maybe we should talk to Dr. Morrison about options," David had replied, and something cold settled in my chest. Options. As if I were a problem to be solved rather than his mother. That's when I decided to lean into their assumptions. If they wanted to see a confused old woman, I'd give them exactly that. Every forgotten name, every repeated question, every moment of manufactured confusion became a tool. I was conducting the most important case of my career, and the defendants had no idea they were being investigated. So there I was, 8 months later, eyes closed, breathing steady, listening to Jessica pace around my living room while she talked on the phone. She thought I was napping, but I was wide awake, cataloging every word. "No, Mother, you don't understand," Jessica was saying, her voice tight with irritation. "She's completely gone now. Last week, she tried to make coffee with orange juice. David had to take her checkbook away because she was writing checks to dead people." I almost smiled at that one. The dead people were my old law partners, and those checks were perfectly legitimate payments to their widows, something Jessica would have known if she'd bothered to ask instead of assuming. "The house alone is worth $800,000, Jessica continued, and I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. Plus, there's the lake cottage, the investment accounts, and God knows what else she's got hidden away. David thinks there might be over 2 million total. 2.7 million. Actually, but who's counting? That old hag doesn't even remember anything anymore." Jessica's voice dropped to what she probably thought was a whisper. "Just a few more days and all the money is ours. David's meeting with the lawyer Monday to get power of attorney finalized. Then we can move her into that place we looked at, the cheap one, and sell this house." The cheap one. My blood ran cold as I remembered the tour they'd taken me on last month. Sunset Manor was a warehouse for forgotten elderly people, where the staff was overworked and the rooms smelled like disinfectant and despair. They'd walked me through those hallways like I was cattle being led to slaughter. Jessica's arm linked through mine, her voice sugary sweet. "Isn't this nice, Margaret? Such friendly staff. And look, they have activities." She'd pointed to a group of residents slumped in wheelchairs around a television, staring blankly at a game show. I'd played confused and agreeable, but inside I was horrified. This was where they planned to warehouse me while they spent my life's work. Jessica was still talking. "David says once we have control, we can liquidate everything within 6 months. We'll keep the cottage for vacations and use the rest to pay off our debts and maybe take that European trip we've been planning." European trip, with my money, while I rotted in a facility that charged $1,500 a month for what amounted to a prison cell. I opened my eyes slowly, carefully, making sure Jessica hadn't noticed. She was standing by the window now, her back to me, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. From behind, with her bleached blonde hair and designer clothes, she looked like every other grasping second wife I'd encountered in my legal career. Women who married for money and saw elderly in-laws as obstacles to their inheritance. The irony was almost laughable. If Jessica had simply been kind to me, if she'd treated me with basic respect, she would have inherited everything anyway. I'd been planning to leave the bulk of my estate to David, with provisions for Jessica and their future children. But kindness, apparently, was too much to ask for. "Trust me, Mother," Jessica was saying. "By Christmas, we'll be celebrating in our new house, and that old bat will be someone else's problem." Old bat. That's what 43 years of building a successful law practice got me in my own home. That's what raising a son, putting him through college, and helping him start his business earned me. But Jessica had made one critical error in her calculations. She assumed that because I was old, I was helpless. She assumed that because I sometimes forgot where I put my keys, something that happened to everyone over 60, I'd lost my edge. Most importantly, she assumed I'd forgotten how to practice law. As I sat there, listening to her plan my imprisonment, I began to smile. A real smile, not the vacant, confused expression I'd been wearing for months. You see, Margaret Holloway didn't spend 4 decades in estate law without learning a thing or two about protecting assets. And while Jessica had been counting my money, I'd been preparing the most important legal document of my career. Monday couldn't come fast enough. The next morning, I woke before dawn with the kind of clarity I hadn't felt in months. While David and Jessica slept in what used to be Richard's study, they'd converted it into their bedroom without asking. I made my way to my real sanctuary, the basement office they didn't know existed. Richard had it built during the renovation 15 years ago, hidden behind what looked like a utility closet. "Every good lawyer needs a war room," he'd said, installing soundproofing and a separate entrance through the back garden. It's where I'd prepared my most complex cases, where I'd kept my most sensitive files. Most importantly, it's where I'd been working for the past 8 months while playing the role of a confused old woman upstairs. I switched on the banker's lamp and looked at the wall I'd created. Dozens of photographs, printed emails, and handwritten notes covered every inch. It looked like something from a crime drama, but this was very real. This was my case against my own family. In the center was a photo of Jessica from last Christmas, her arms wrapped around David, both of them grinning at the camera. To anyone else, it would look like a happy family moment, but I'd captured it right after she'd made a joke about my senior moments that had the whole table laughing. Everyone except my granddaughter Sarah, who'd squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "I think Grandma's just tired." Sarah, 22 years old, working 2 jobs to pay for nursing school because her parents refused to help her. "She needs to learn responsibility," David had said when she'd asked for assistance with tuition. The same man who'd asked me for $50,000 to invest in his friend's restaurant venture, money that disappeared within 6 months. I pulled out the thick folder labeled Evidence and spread its contents across my desk. 8 months of careful documentation. Photos of Jessica going through my jewelry box when she thought I was napping. Screenshots of her Facebook posts about dealing with difficult elderly relatives that she'd posted and then quickly deleted. Audio recordings from the digital recorder I'd hidden in the kitchen fruit bowl. But the most damning evidence was financial. Jessica didn't know that I'd been tracking every penny that moved through my accounts. The grocery money she'd been taking. The utility bills that somehow cost 3 times what they used to. The mysterious charges on my credit card for restaurants I'd never been to, and clothes that never appeared in my closet. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but theft nonetheless. Over 8 months, they'd stolen nearly $12,000 while telling everyone what devoted caregivers they were. I opened my laptop. They assumed I was too confused to use technology, and pulled up the document I'd been crafting. A new will, meticulously prepared, with every legal requirement satisfied. But this wasn't just about changing beneficiaries. This was about justice. The original will I'd made 3 years ago left everything to David, with Jessica as a secondary beneficiary. Standard, loving, what any mother would do. But that will was going to disappear, replaced by something very different. I divided my estate into specific categories. The house would go to Sarah, along with enough money to finish school and start her life. The lake cottage would be donated to a foundation that helped elderly abuse victims. My investment accounts would fund a scholarship program for students like Sarah who couldn't rely on family support. And David? David would receive exactly what he'd given me over the past 8 months. Nothing. But the cruelest provision was saved for Jessica. She'd receive a trust fund of $50,000. A generous amount by any measure. The catch? It could only be used for elder care. Specifically, it could only be accessed if she volunteered at least 20 hours per week at a nursing home for 5 consecutive years. I almost laughed thinking about Jessica's manicured hands, changing bedpans, and feeding patients. She'd probably rather give up the money entirely. The new will was already notarized and witnessed by 2 of my former colleagues who'd been delighted to help with what they thought was just an estate update. They had no idea they were helping me conduct the most satisfying case of my career. I heard footsteps upstairs and quickly gathered the papers. David was always up early, and I needed to get back to my room before they noticed I was gone. I'd perfected the art of moving silently through the house, another skill Jessica wouldn't expect from a confused old woman. As I climbed the basement stairs, I could hear Jessica's voice from the kitchen. "Told my mother we should have this wrapped up by next week. Once we get power of attorney, we can start liquidating her assets. The lawyer says the nursing home has an opening in February. 3 weeks away." I paused at the top of the stairs, listening to my son agree to my imprisonment. It's for her own good, David was saying, but his voice sounded hollow. She can't take care of herself anymore. Can't take care of myself. I'd been managing my own affairs since before he was born. I'd built a successful law practice from nothing, managed complex estates worth millions, and guided countless families through their most difficult legal challenges. But because I sometimes pretended to forget where I put my glasses, I was incompetent. I made my way back to my bedroom and climbed into bed, just as Jessica's heels clicked up the stairs. A moment later, she peeked through my door. "Good morning, Margaret," she said in that exaggerated sing-song voice people use with children and the elderly. "Did you sleep well?" I blinked slowly and looked around as if confused. "Oh, hello, dear. What day is it?" "It's Friday, Margaret. Remember? David has that appointment with the lawyer today." I let my face show a flicker of worry. "Lawyer? Am I in trouble?" Jessica's smile was pure poison wrapped in artificial sweetener. "No, no trouble at all. We're just making sure all your papers are in order, so you don't have to worry about anything anymore." Don't have to worry, because they'd be handling everything. My money, my property, my future. All taken care of by two people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their European vacation. "That's nice, dear," I said, allowing my voice to waver slightly. "I do get so confused about these things." "Of course you do." Jessica patted my hand like I was a pet. "That's why David and I are here to take care of everything." After she left, I lay in bed thinking about Monday. David would go to see Martin Fletcher, my old colleague who'd been handling my affairs since Richard died. Martin had no idea about the new will hidden in my basement office. As far as he knew, I was still the sharp, competent woman who'd helped him with his mother's estate last year. David would present the power of attorney papers and expect Martin to hand over control of my life. But I had a different gift in mind. A handwritten letter, carefully crafted, that would change everything. Monday couldn't come fast enough. I heard my daughter-in-law whisper, "That old hag doesn't even remember anything anymore. Just a few more days and all the money is ours." But she didn't know I was a lawyer. On Monday, her face dropped when she opened the handwritten gift I gave her. But let me start from the beginning, because what Jessica said that Thursday afternoon wasn't just cruel. It was the moment I realized I'd been playing a dangerous game for far too long. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the burgundy leather one Richard bought me for our 30th anniversary, pretending to doze while afternoon sunlight streamed through the living room windows. For the past 8 months, I'd been letting my family believe I was slipping into dementia. It started as a small experiment, really. After Richard's funeral, when David and Jessica moved in to take care of me, I noticed how differently they spoke to me when they thought I wasn't fully present. The first time I caught them whispering about my condition, I was coming back from the kitchen with my afternoon tea. They were huddled by the mantelpiece, Jessica's perfectly manicured finger pointing at the family photos. "She's getting worse," Jessica had said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Yesterday, she asked me 3 times if I'd seen her reading glasses. They were on her head." I had done that on purpose, of course. As a former estate attorney who'd spent 43 years dealing with family disputes, I knew exactly how greed revealed itself. What I hadn't expected was how quickly my own son would join in. "Maybe we should talk to Dr. Morrison about options," David had replied, and something cold settled in my chest. Options. As if I were a problem to be solved rather than his mother. That's when I decided to lean into their assumptions. If they wanted to see a confused old woman, I'd give them exactly that. Every forgotten name, every repeated question, every moment of manufactured confusion became a tool. I was conducting the most important case of my career, and the defendants had no idea they were being investigated. So there I was. 8 months later, eyes closed, breathing steady, listening to Jessica pace around my living room while she talked on the phone. She thought I was napping, but I was wide awake, cataloging every word. "No, Mother, you don't understand," Jessica was saying, her voice tight with irritation. "She's completely gone now. Last week she tried to make coffee with orange juice. David had to take her checkbook away because she was writing checks to dead people." I almost smiled at that one. The dead people were my old law partners, and those checks were perfectly legitimate payments to their widows, something Jessica would have known if she'd bothered to ask instead of assuming. "The house alone is worth $800,000, Jessica continued, and I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. "Plus, there's the lake cottage, the investment accounts, and God knows what else she's got hidden away. David thinks there might be over $2 million total. $2.7 million actually, but who's counting?" "That old hag doesn't even remember anything anymore." Jessica's voice dropped to what she probably thought was a whisper. Just a few more days, and all the money is ours. David's meeting with the lawyer Monday to get power of attorney finalized. Then we can move her into that place we looked at, the cheap one, and sell this house, the cheap one. My blood ran cold as I remembered the tour they'd taken me on last month. Sunset Manor was a warehouse for forgotten elderly people, where the staff was overworked and the rooms smelled like disinfectant and despair. They'd walked me through those hallways like I was cattle being led to slaughter. Jessica's arm linked through mine, her voice sugary sweet. Isn't this nice, Margaret? Such friendly staff, and look, they have activities. She'd pointed to a group of residents slumped in wheelchairs around a television, staring blankly at a game show. I'd played confused and agreeable, but inside I was horrified. This was where they planned to warehouse me while they spent my life's work. Jessica was still talking. David says once we have control, we can liquidate everything within 6 months. We'll keep the cottage for vacations and use the rest to pay off our debts and maybe take that European trip we've been planning. European trip. With my money. While I rotted in a facility that charged $1,500 a month for what amounted to a prison cell. I opened my eyes slowly, carefully, making sure Jessica hadn't noticed. She was standing by the window now, her back to me, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. From behind, with her bleached blonde hair and designer clothes, she looked like every other grasping second wife I'd encountered in my legal career. Women who married for money and saw elderly in-laws as obstacles to their inheritance. The irony was almost laughable. If Jessica had simply been kind to me, if she'd treated me with basic respect, she would have inherited everything anyway. I'd been planning to leave the bulk of my estate to David, with provisions for Jessica and their future children. But kindness, apparently, was too much to ask for. Trust me, Mother, Jessica was saying. By Christmas, we'll be celebrating in our new house, and that old bat will be someone else's problem. Old bat. That's what 43 years of building a successful law practice got me in my own home. That's what raising a son, putting him through college, and helping him start his business earned me. But Jessica had made one critical error in her calculations. She assumed that because I was old, I was helpless. She assumed that because I sometimes forgot where I put my keys, something that happened to everyone over 60, I'd lost my edge. Most importantly, she assumed I'd forgotten how to practice law. As I sat there, listening to her plan my imprisonment, I began to smile. A real smile. Not the vacant, confused expression I'd been wearing for months. You see, Margaret Catherine Holloway didn't spend 4 decades in estate law without learning a thing or two about protecting assets. And while Jessica had been counting my money, I'd been preparing the most important legal document of my career. Monday couldn't come fast enough. Monday morning arrived with crisp January air that used to make me feel energized and ready for court. Today, it felt like justice itself was in the atmosphere. I sat at my kitchen table, carefully writing in the shaky handwriting I'd been perfecting for months, while Jessica bustled around making what she called a proper breakfast for David's big day. She had no idea she was watching me prepare her downfall. Now, Margaret, Jessica said, setting down a plate of toast I hadn't asked for. David will be gone most of the morning handling some important paperwork. You just stay here and rest, okay? I looked up with the vacant smile I'd mastered. Paperwork? Is everything all right? Everything's perfect. Jessica's voice had that patronizing sweetness that made my skin crawl. We're just making sure you're taken care of properly. David appeared in the doorway, adjusting his tie. He looked nervous, which was satisfying. Good. He should be nervous about what he was planning to do to his own mother. The appointment's at 10. He said to Jessica, then glanced at me. Mom, Mr. Fletcher just wants to review some documents with me. Nothing for you to worry about. Nothing for me to worry about. If only he knew that Martin Fletcher and I had been colleagues for 30 years, and that Martin's mother had lived in a memory care facility before she passed. Martin knew exactly what good elder care looked like, and he knew what exploitation looked like too. After David left, Jessica became a different person entirely. The fake sweetness evaporated completely, replaced by cold efficiency. She spent the morning going through my things with the confidence of someone who believed she already owned them. I watched from my chair as she photographed my jewelry, made lists of my art pieces, and even measured my dining room furniture. She was conducting an inventory, like I was already dead and she was preparing for an estate sale. This china set must be worth a fortune, she muttered, holding up one of my grandmother's plates to examine the maker's mark. We should definitely keep this for special occasions. My grandmother's china, the set that had survived the Depression, World War II, and 60 years of family gatherings. Jessica was planning to keep it like a trophy from her successful manipulation campaign. The phone rang around noon, and Jessica answered with false cheer. Holloway residence, Jessica speaking. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Jessica's face went through several distinct expressions. Confusion first, then irritation, then something approaching genuine panic. "What do you mean she needs to be there?" Jessica's voice rose an octave. "We were told this was just a formality." "No, she's been having really bad days lately. I don't think she could handle the stress of a formal meeting." She hung up and stared at the phone like it had personally betrayed her. Then she turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted fear. "Margaret," she said very carefully, "that was Mr. Fletcher's office. They want you to come to the appointment this afternoon." I let my face show the appropriate level of confusion and concern. "Me? But I thought David was handling everything." "He is, but apparently—" Jessica seemed to be choosing her words very carefully, probably trying to figure out how much I could understand. "Apparently, there are some questions that only you can answer. Questions only I could answer. Martin Fletcher was nobody's fool. If David had walked into his office this morning talking about power of attorney for a client Martin knew personally, Martin would have immediately insisted on speaking with me directly. It was basic legal ethics, something David clearly hadn't considered when planning this takeover. "I don't know," I said, letting my voice waver with uncertainty. "I get so confused in offices nowadays. All those papers and people talking so fast. Maybe I should just stay home." Jessica's jaw tightened visibly. She needed me cooperative for this to work, but she also needed to maintain the fiction that I was mentally incompetent. It was a delicate balance, and I could see her struggling with it. "It'll be fine, Margaret. David and I will be right there with you. You just need to answer a few simple questions, and then we can come home and have a nice quiet afternoon." Simple questions, like whether I understood what power of attorney meant, like whether I truly wanted my son to control every aspect of my finances, like whether I felt safe and well cared for in my own home. I'd been preparing for those exact questions for 8 months. An hour later, we were sitting in Martin Fletcher's office on the 15th floor of the building where I'd spent so many years of my career. The familiar smell of leather-bound books and strong coffee brought back memories of countless client meetings, tense negotiations, and hard-won victories. Martin stood when we entered, his silver hair perfectly styled as always, his handshake firm and warm when he greeted me. "Margaret," he said, and I could see him studying my face very carefully. "It's good to see you. How are you feeling today?" This was the crucial moment. I could drop the entire act right now, tell Martin everything, and watch David and Jessica's world crumble in real time. But that would be too easy, too quick. They deserved something much more elaborate. "Oh, hello," I said, blinking slowly as if trying to place his familiar face. "Do I know you from somewhere?" Martin's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught the slight raise of his eyebrow. He'd known me for 3 decades. He knew I never forgot a face, especially not his. "I'm Martin Fletcher. Margaret. I've been handling some of your legal affairs since Richard passed away." "Richard?" I let confusion cloud my features entirely. "Is Richard here? I thought he was supposed to meet me." Jessica jumped in immediately, her voice dripping with fake patience. "Richard was your husband, Margaret. He passed away 2 years ago, remember? We've talked about this many times." 2 years? I shook my head slowly, as if the timeline made no sense. "That can't be right. I just made him coffee this morning before we left." It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, and I could see it having exactly the effect I'd intended. Martin's face remained professionally neutral, but David looked visibly relieved. "See?" His expression clearly said, "She really is completely lost." Martin gestured for us to sit in the comfortable chairs arranged around his conference table. "David has brought me some documents regarding power of attorney. Margaret, do you understand what that means?" I tilted my head to one side like a confused bird. "Power? Like electricity? Is there something wrong with the house?" "No, Mom," David said gently, taking my hand in what I'm sure he thought was a caring gesture. "It means I would help you with your paperwork and your bank accounts. Make sure all your bills get paid on time and everything stays organized." "Oh." I nodded slowly, as if this was a completely new concept. "That sounds very nice of you, dear. I do seem to forget things more often lately. Sometimes would have been generous." According to Jessica's carefully constructed narrative, I forgot absolutely everything all the time. Martin leaned forward slightly in his chair. "Margaret, I need to ask you some questions privately. David, Jessica, would you mind waiting in the reception area for just a few minutes?" Jessica's face went completely white. "Is that really necessary, Mr. Fletcher?" Margaret gets very anxious and confused when we're not with her to help explain things. "It's standard procedure for this type of legal matter," Martin said with the firmness of someone who'd been practicing law longer than Jessica had been alive. "I'll just need a few minutes to ensure everything is properly documented." They had absolutely no choice but to comply, though Jessica shot me one final warning look as she reluctantly followed David out of the office. "Be good. That look said very clearly, "Don't say anything stupid or confusing." The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind them, Martin's entire demeanor changed completely. He leaned back in his leather chair and studied me with the sharp, calculating eyes of the prosecutor he'd once been. "Margaret Catherine Holloway," he said very quietly, "either you've developed the most remarkably selective case of dementia in medical history, or you're playing an extremely dangerous game here." I maintained my confused, helpless expression for exactly 3 seconds. Then I allowed myself to smile for the first time in months. "Hello, Martin," I said in my normal, perfectly clear voice. "I think it's time we discussed my new will." Martin's face broke into the first genuine smile I'd seen in months. "Margaret, you brilliant, devious woman. How long have you been planning this?" 8 months, I said, settling back into my chair with relief. It felt incredible to drop the act, even temporarily. Ever since I overheard Jessica telling her mother that I was slipping fast, and they'd need to take control soon, and the new will you mentioned, I reached into my purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. Completely legal, properly witnessed, notarized last week by Janet Morrison from your old firm. She thinks it's just a routine update. Martin took the envelope but didn't open it. "Margaret, what they're attempting is elder abuse. We could pursue criminal charges." "No," my voice was firm. "Criminal charges would take years and put me through hell. I want this finished quickly and quietly. Justice, not revenge." He nodded slowly. "What do you need from me? Play along today. Act concerned about my capacity. Suggest a competency evaluation before any power of attorney can be finalized. That'll buy you time. All I need is enough time to execute the new will properly." I leaned forward. "Martin, there's something else. My granddaughter Sarah doesn't know what her parents are planning. She calls me every week, visits when she can. She's the only one who still sees me as a person. She'll be protected in the new will. She'll inherit the house and enough money to finish nursing school. The rest goes to charity." I paused. "David gets nothing. Jessica gets a trust fund that can only be used for elder care volunteer work." Martin actually chuckled. "Poetic justice. What about when you reveal the truth? I need you to call Sarah this week. Tell her you're updating my estate documents and need her as a witness. Don't mention the family meeting or the power of attorney nonsense. Just get her here for Thursday afternoon." Thursday? That's when I plan to drop the bomb. Jessica wants to celebrate getting the power of attorney by taking me to tour that awful nursing home again. Instead, she's going to get the surprise of her life. A knock interrupted us. "Mr. Fletcher?" His secretary's voice came through the intercom. "The family is getting restless in the waiting room." Martin winked at me. Showtime. When David and Jessica returned, I was back in character, looking confused and slightly overwhelmed. Martin had arranged some papers on his desk to look official and intimidating. "Well," Jessica said, sitting on the edge of her chair, "how did everything go?" Martin looked troubled. "I'm afraid there are some complications. Margaret seems to be having difficulty understanding the implications of the power of attorney arrangement." David frowned. "What kind of difficulties?" She couldn't explain what power of attorney means. She thought Richard was still alive, and she seemed confused about basic financial concepts. Martin's performance was flawless. "Under these circumstances, I'm legally obligated to recommend a formal competency evaluation before proceeding." "A what?" Jessica's voice went up an octave. "A court-appointed evaluator would need to assess Margaret's mental capacity. It's standard procedure when there are questions about a person's ability to make legal decisions." I watched Jessica's face cycle through emotions. Panic, calculation, then forced calm. "How long would that take?" "Usually 2 to 3 weeks. The court calendar is quite full." 2 to 3 weeks. I could see Jessica doing math in her head, probably calculating how much longer she'd have to maintain her caring daughter-in-law facade. "Isn't there a faster way?" David asked. "We're just trying to help Mom manage her affairs." "I understand your concern," Martin said smoothly. "But the law requires certain protections for elderly clients. I'm sure you want everything done properly." Of course they didn't want everything done properly. They wanted it done quickly and quietly so they could start liquidating my assets. "In the meantime," Martin continued, "I'd recommend keeping detailed records of Margaret's daily activities and any concerning behaviors. The evaluator will want to see evidence of her current functioning level." Jessica practically vibrated with frustration. "So we can't do anything for weeks?" "I'm afraid not, but this is for Margaret's protection, which I'm sure is your primary concern." The ride home was tense. Jessica sat in the passenger seat, her jaw clenched so tight I was surprised she didn't crack a tooth. David kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror like I might spontaneously recover my wits. 2 to 3 weeks, Jessica muttered. 2 to 3 weeks of pretending everything is fine. "Maybe it's for the best," David said weakly. "We want to make sure we're doing the right thing." Jessica turned on him with fury I'd never seen before. "The right thing? David, we've been planning this for months. The nursing home deposit, the real estate agent, everything. And now some lawyer wants to drag this out because your mother can't remember what year it is? Some lawyer. Martin Fletcher had been handling complex estate cases since before Jessica was born, but now he was just some lawyer standing between her and my money. When we got home, Jessica disappeared into what used to be Richard's study, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I could hear her on the phone, her voice rising and falling in angry bursts. David lingered in the living room, looking uncomfortable. Mom, are you okay? That was a lot of confusion today, even for... He trailed off, probably realizing he was about to say, even for someone with dementia. I'm fine, dear, I said, patting his hand. Just tired. All those questions made my head spin. Maybe you should rest. I'll make dinner tonight. David cooking dinner. When was the last time that had happened? Probably not since Jessica entered the picture and decided that traditional gender roles were beneath her unless they involved spending my money. I went to my room and listened to Jessica's muffled rants through the walls. I caught fragments. Incompetent lawyer, stubborn old woman, and my personal favorite, if she's really that far gone, maybe we should just wait for nature to take its course. Wait for nature to take its course. As if my death would be a minor inconvenience to endure, rather than the loss of a mother and grandmother. That evening, I called Sarah from the phone in my bedroom. Grandma, how are you feeling? Her voice was like sunshine after months of clouds. Sarah never talked to me like I was a child or an invalid. She asked about my day, told me about her classes, complained about difficult patients at the hospital where she worked part-time. I'm doing well, sweetheart. How's school? Exhausting but good. Only one more semester before I graduate. She paused. Grandma, Dad mentioned you've been having some memory problems. Are you taking care of yourself? Memory problems. David's version of events had reached Sarah, probably filtered through Jessica's interpretation. Oh, you know how it is at my age. I forget where I put my glasses sometimes. That's not memory problems, that's being human. Dad makes it sound like you're... Like I'm what? Nothing. Never mind. I just worry about you sometimes, especially with Dad and Jessica making all these decisions about your care. Smart girl. Sarah could sense something was wrong even if she couldn't put her finger on it. Sarah, would you do me a favor? Could you come visit this Thursday afternoon? I miss seeing you. Of course. I can skip my afternoon class. Is everything okay? Everything's going to be just fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of gray sky that promised snow. I woke early, my heart pounding with anticipation rather than fear. Today was the day I stopped being a victim and became the architect of my own justice. Jessica was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, her coffee mug gripped so tightly her knuckles were white. She'd been on edge all week, snapping at David over every small thing, checking her phone obsessively for updates from Martin's office that would never come. Good morning, Margaret, she said without looking up. We have that appointment at Sunset Manor this afternoon. Remember? We're going to look at your new room. My new room. Not a potential room or options for care. My new room, as if it was already decided. As if I had no say in where I'd spend my final years. That sounds nice, dear, I said, shuffling to the coffee pot. Will David be coming? He has to work. But don't worry, I'll be there to help you understand everything. Help me understand. Jessica had such a gift for making condescension sound like kindness. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m. Sarah stood on the porch, her nursing school backpack over her shoulder, her face bright with the kind of genuine smile I hadn't seen in my own house for months. Grandma! She hugged me tightly, and for a moment I almost broke character. This was what love felt like. Not obligation, not manipulation, just pure affection. Sarah, sweetheart, what are you doing here? Jessica appeared behind me, her voice sharp with surprise and annoyance. Grandma asked me to visit. I had some free time between classes. I could see Jessica's mind racing. She couldn't cancel the nursing home appointment without raising suspicions, but she also couldn't leave me alone with Sarah. Not when Sarah might ask uncomfortable questions about my deteriorating condition. Actually, Jessica said, forcing a smile, we were just heading out to look at a lovely care facility. Maybe Sarah could come another time? Oh, that's okay, Sarah said easily. I can wait here until you get back. I brought my study materials. Jessica's jaw tightened. She was trapped between her timeline and her need to control the narrative. You know what? I said, as if the idea had just occurred to me. Why don't we all go? Sarah could help me understand what I'm looking at. Jessica couldn't object without seeming heartless. Of course, if Sarah doesn't mind. 20 minutes later, we were pulling into the parking lot of Sunset Manor. The building looked exactly as depressing as I remembered. Gray concrete, small windows, the kind of institutional architecture designed to warehouse people efficiently rather than house them comfortably. As we walked through the front doors, Sarah's expression shifted. I watched her take in the smell of disinfectant, the beige walls, the residents slumped in wheelchairs in the main corridor. This wasn't a care facility. This was a place where people came to die slowly. "This is where you want Grandma to live?" Sarah asked Jessica, her voice carefully neutral. "It's a very well-regarded facility," Jessica replied smoothly. "The staff is excellent, and Margaret would have everything she needs. Everything she needs. A bed, 3 meals a day, and someone to change her sheets when she dies." The tour guide, a woman named Linda with an aggressively cheerful demeanor, led us through the facility. We saw the dining room with its plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting. The activities room where a handful of residents sat staring at a television turned up too loud. The garden area that was really just a small courtyard with a few dying plants. "And this would be Margaret's room," Linda announced, opening a door to reveal a space roughly the size of my current walk-in closet. 2 single beds, 2 small dressers, a shared bathroom that had seen better decades. "She'd have a roommate?" Sarah asked. "Oh, yes. Socialization is very important for our residents. Margaret would be sharing with Mrs. Patterson. She's 93 and very quiet. Very quiet." I wondered if Mrs. Patterson was quiet by choice or by circumstance. "What do you think, Margaret?" Jessica asked, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "Doesn't this look comfortable?" I looked around the room at the narrow beds and barred windows, at the call button that probably took 20 minutes to get answered. This was where Jessica and David planned to put me while they lived in my house, ate off my grandmother's china, and spent my life savings on European vacations. It's very, I paused, as if searching for words, small. "Well, you won't need much space," Jessica said quickly, "and the staff will take care of everything for you. No more worrying about bills or housework or any of those confusing things." Sarah was staring at Jessica like she'd never seen her before. "Confusing things?" "Oh, you know how Grandma gets mixed up lately. Just last week, she tried to pay the electric bill twice and couldn't remember if she'd fed the neighbor's cat. I had fed the neighbor's cat exactly once, when they were out of town. But in Jessica's version, it became evidence of my failing mind. "Grandma," Sarah said, turning to me directly, "how do you feel about this place?" This was the moment. I could feel Jessica tense beside me, probably preparing to jump in with more lies about my confusion and inability to make decisions. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, looked Sarah directly in the eyes, and spoke in my clearest, strongest voice. "I feel like my daughter-in-law has been planning to warehouse me here, while she and my son steal everything I've worked for my entire life." The silence was deafening. Linda's mouth fell open. Sarah blinked rapidly, trying to process what she'd just heard, and Jessica went completely white. "Margaret," Jessica said carefully, "you're having one of your confused episodes. Remember what Dr. Morrison said about these moments?" "Dr. Morrison never said anything about confused episodes because I've never had any." I turned to face Jessica fully. "I've been perfectly lucid this entire time, watching you inventory my belongings, listening to you plan my imprisonment, documenting every theft from my accounts." "Grandma," Sarah whispered, "you've been pretending?" "For 8 months. Ever since I heard your stepmother tell her mother that I was slipping fast and they needed to take control of my money." Jessica was backing away slowly, her face cycling through panic and calculation. "You don't understand what you're saying. The stress of this decision is making you paranoid." "The only thing making me paranoid is having a daughter-in-law who sees me as an obstacle to her inheritance." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded document. "Sarah, this is my new will. Everything goes to you and to charity. Jessica gets a trust fund that can only be accessed if she volunteers at nursing homes for 5 years." Sarah unfolded the paper with shaking hands. "Grandma, is this real?" "Completely legal and binding, witnessed and notarized." I looked at Jessica, who had gone from white to green. "You wanted to see how long it would take me to find my way home, Jessica. Well, I never left." Linda, the tour guide, was slowly backing toward the door. This was clearly beyond her pay grade. Jessica's mask finally slipped completely. "You manipulative old bitch. Old. Do you have any idea what you've done? David and I have debts, responsibilities. We needed that money. You needed to earn your own money instead of planning to steal mine." "This isn't over," Jessica snarled. "David won't let you get away with this." I smiled. "David can contest the will if he wants. But he'll need to explain to a judge why he was planning to put his mentally competent mother in the cheapest nursing home he could find while liquidating her assets." As we walked back to the car, Sarah was quiet, processing everything she'd learned. Finally, she spoke. "Grandma, where are you going to live now?" "In my own house. With my granddaughter, if she'll have me. I squeezed her hand. I think it's time you moved out of that terrible apartment and finished school without working 2 jobs. Sarah started crying then, but they were tears of relief and joy. I thought I was losing you. Never, sweetheart. I was just making sure I knew who really loved me. Behind us, Jessica sat in stony silence, probably calculating whether she had any legal options left. She didn't. The war was over, and for the first time in months, the right side had won. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee, watching Sarah organize her nursing textbooks at the table where Jessica used to count my money. The morning sun streamed through windows that were mine again. David tried to contest the will, hiring a lawyer with money he didn't have. It lasted exactly 1 hearing. When Martin Fletcher presented 8 months of documented evidence, the judge dismissed the case with prejudice. Morning. Grandma, Sarah said, not looking up from her pharmacology textbook. She'd moved in the week after our nursing home revelation. Her grades had improved dramatically once she could focus on school instead of working double shifts. The doorbell rang. David stood on my porch looking like he'd aged 5 years and 3 months. His clothes were rumpled, his car was smaller, and his expression was exhaustion mixed with regret. Hello, David. Mom, can we talk? I let him in. Sarah looked up from her books, expression carefully neutral. David sat heavily in what used to be his favorite chair. Mom, I had no idea Jessica was taking money from your accounts. I poured coffee and didn't offer him any. You had no idea she was stealing, but you were fine with putting me in that warehouse? I thought you were getting confused. The things Jessica told me, the examples she manufactured. Yes, Jessica left last week. When the trust fund conditions became clear, 5 years of elder care work before touching a penny, Jessica tried convincing David to wait it out. But David lost his job 2 weeks after the will reading. Where did she go? Back to her mother's in Phoenix. She said I was weak for not fighting harder. He looked at his hands. She was right about the weak part. Sarah closed her textbook. Dad, you chose to believe the worst about Grandma because it was easier than standing up to your wife. I know. And I have to live with that forever. I studied my son's face. Instead of manipulation, I saw genuine remorse and humility. What do you want, David? I want to apologize. I want to try rebuilding some kind of relationship if possible. David, if you want to rebuild trust, you'll do it slowly. Through actions, not words. I understand. Sarah is living here now. This is her home as much as mine. Of course. And you'll get a job and start taking responsibility for your own life. He nodded. I already started. I'm working at Henderson Construction. Just labor, but it's honest work. I felt a flicker of hope. Good. Sarah looked between us. Dad, you can stay for lunch if you want. But no drama. No drama, David agreed. As I made sandwiches, I watched my son and granddaughter talk quietly. The conversation was stilted, careful, but it was a start. Trust, I reflected, was like my grandmother's china. Once broken, it could be repaired, but the cracks would always show. After David left, Sarah and I sat in the living room with coffee. Do you think he's really changed? She asked. I think he's scared and realizes he made terrible choices. Whether that translates to actual change remains to be seen. Are you going to let him back into your life? Cautiously. With boundaries, and only if he proves he deserves it. Sarah curled up in her chair. I'm proud of you, Grandma, for not becoming bitter. Oh, sweetheart, I laughed. I was bitter for about 10 minutes, but bitterness is just another way of letting other people control your happiness. As evening settled over my house, filled with love instead of lies, I felt the deep satisfaction of justice served. Not revenge, but justice. I had my home, my granddaughter, and my dignity back. And if David truly wanted to earn his way back into our lives, well, stranger things had happened. After all, I'd spent 8 months playing a confused old woman while orchestrating the perfect legal takedown. Compared to that, forgiving my son seemed almost simple. Almost.